Hey guys, it's Bobby. Did you know our 2019 Fantasy Football Draft Kit is open for you now? We've got printable cheat sheets that are customizable to your league. You can put auction values in there. You can use Draft Wizard as much as you want with our draft kit. You get in-season advice like the My Playbook tool that you can use in as many leagues as you want. It includes a trade finder, an analyzer, and you get all the premium article content as well. Make sure to check out our Fantasy Football Draft Kit at fantasypros.com/fantasy-football-draft-kit. All right, let's talk some football. The Fantasy Pros Football Podcast. I'm Bobby Sylvester, joined today by Justin Boone of theScore. He's on Twitter at Justin Boone. I'm at Bobby Fantasy Pro, and Justin has been one of the top 10 most accurate experts out of over 150, 6 of the last 7 seasons. Justin, that is remarkable.
I love coming on this podcast every time because you introduce me that way every single time, and it feels great. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. So here's the plan. Tags obviously is not here today. He's not going to be here for the next episode either, but we'll get him back next week. We've got a little bit of news to talk about, and then we're going to dive into boom or bust players. I've got like 15 of them listed, and Justin and I are just going to attack those and tell you all what we think about them, what the expert consensus in the industry thinks about them, where they're being drafted, everything like that. Let's start with Amari Cooper. Justin, he says he's going to catch 2,000 yards this year. I mean, obviously that's not going to happen, but are we sleeping on him a little bit? Is he an elite wide receiver?
I don't know that he's elite, but he's not far off. And, you know, when you first asked me to come on the podcast, I thought maybe we were going to talk a bunch about our Dynasty League that we have together. And in that league, I have Cooper, actually. And things weren't looking so great. Last year, I think I almost traded him to Tags, actually. We had talked about it quite a bit.
No surprise Tags was going after him, right? Cooper's his boy.
The season got going, and I was like, oh my God, I should have traded him away. Why didn't I trade him? And then fortunately moves over to the Cowboys and things turn around. I have him ranked as a top 10 receiver now. Like I said, he's not far off, but at this time of year, you're going to hear all these players talk just crazy talk, right? It's going to be, oh, we're going to get 2,000 yards. Oh, I'm going to get, 120 catches this year. All kinds of stuff. It's great. It's really positive, but you shouldn't let that affect your fantasy decisions that much.
I think that's fair. So you've got Amari Cooper in your top 10. I do as well. Do you have him over Juju Smith-Schuster, Mike Evans, AJ Green? Who do you have him over?
I don't have my rankings in front of me right now, so I'd have to go off the top of my head because I know, now we have PPR and half-point PPR and everything. There's a lot to keep up on, but I would take him right behind that stretch. So I think I have Juju, and then I still have AB, and then I have Cooper right behind there. I've dropped guys like AJ Green down a little bit just because we don't know that injury situation, how the toe foot injury, how that's going to affect him. Even, missing a lot of the install with the new offense. He's a veteran. He's AJ Green. He'll be fine, but that's just not, you don't want to see that this time of year. You want to see him in there. You want to hear the positive reports. So I've dropped him down a little bit. And yeah, Cooper in that offense, he's going to have to deal with, Michael Gallup. I think Michael Gallup's going to come on, and some people might be worried that Randall Cobb's going to be there and take some targets, but it's pretty clear from what we saw last year that Cooper's going to be a target hog, just like those guys we're talking about, Juju and AB and stuff. So I think he deserves to have a spot right behind them.
Yeah, he's going right now in the 3rd round. I've got him as my wide receiver 8, so I've got him ahead of some of those guys. I've got him ahead of Juju, but his ADP right now is 13. That's where he was going last year. And it's not like his stock hasn't changed, right? He went to an offense that actually uses him the right way. And he was phenomenal from the time he went over there. And keep in mind, he didn't even know the playbook. So I can't understand still drafting him behind. I guess Adam Thielen, you can make a case for him. Keenan Allen's 11, AJ Green 12. T.Y. Hilton's all the way up at 9. I'd much rather have Amari Cooper than T.Y. Hilton or Thielen.
Yeah, for sure. I have Cooper above all those guys, and he's so young still as well. That's one of the things that everyone forgets. He came into the league so young that he's even younger than some of these guys who are just getting to the league. So it's a great thing. I'm really happy that I have him in Dynasty now. Like I said, a year ago was very worried. Now I think the future's really bright for him.
Yeah. So that wasn't exactly news. That was just kind of, Amari Cooper talking it up and everything. This is news. Tyreek Hill is apparently meeting with investigators on Wednesday. We're recording this Tuesday afternoon, so we don't know the details yet. On the next show that we have, we'll break down what happened if we have any news from there. But it sounds like we're going to get some information on Tyreek Hill before fantasy drafts start.
Yeah, and this is the topic that, we never want to discuss as fantasy analysts. It's the worst. It's just an awful situation, and it's unfortunate that we have to then sort of spin it and look at, well, what's it going to mean for fantasy this season? But that's our job. That's what we got to do. I think we're going to see him get a suspension. We don't know how long. I would guess it's probably going to be 6 or 8 games. That seems to be in line with, but anything is possible here still, right? He could come away from this without a suspension. It could be a little bit longer. So everything's still on the table. But I know from my perspective, I'm definitely buying shares of the other receivers in that offense, because in that first half of the season, you're going to want to own some of those guys, I think, because I do think we're going to see him miss at least some time. So Sammy Watkins, I'm very interested in him. Obviously a lot of people are going after Mecole Hardman. I'm not as high on Hardman. I think he's got a little ways to go still. One guy that I've picked up a couple places is Byron Pringle, and he's someone who's a little further down. He's a name that definitely, I think there's probably a lot of people out there aren't paying attention to him, but he flashed a little bit last year and then got hurt. And they stashed him away on IR, and then he flashed again in OTAs this year. So there's a chance there's going to be an opportunity there for someone, Demarcus Robinson's someone else that I like too, but he hasn't really shown it yet. So I think the best case scenario is, other than Watkins, who's, essentially going to step up into that number 1 role if Hill's out, we have to keep saying. Behind him, I just want to get shares of all those guys. I want to sprinkle it across, make sure you have a little bit of everyone, because someone is going to step up in that Patrick Mahomes offense.
I don't want to speculate too much on what's going to happen with Tyreek Hill. Right now his ADP is 25. We'll talk about where to draft him when we know how long he's going to be out. But just right now, if you're doing a best ball league, where do you have Sammy Watkins? And are you taking Patrick Mahomes still as the quarterback 1?
I am taking Mahomes as the quarterback 1, but ranking-wise, when you're looking at, your top 150 or 200, the overall, I have him a lot further down. I have him down in like the 5th round or so, and that's
okay. And you're not getting him.
I'm 100% not getting him anywhere. Yeah, I've made that pretty clear all off season. But that's partially because of, Hill potentially missing time, and also just because of how deep quarterback is. And I'm sure we'll probably talk about a couple of quarterbacks today, but whenever you discuss quarterback right now and you look at their ADPs, it's just hard to justify spending a pick in the top, 7, 8 rounds on a quarterback when you can fill out every other position, and there's so much value later in the draft there. You mentioned Watkins. I have him in the 20s. I think we're looking at him. I think even if Hill's playing, Watkins has a chance to be a top 30 receiver. I don't think that is, even a question in that offense. It's just a matter of, can he stay healthy? If Hill's not there and Watkins is able to stay healthy, then he's going to move up into the top 20 for sure.
Sammy Watkins, last 3 years, wide receiver 88, wide receiver 34, wide receiver 63. Now, granted, he hasn't been healthy, and he is in Patrick Mahomes' offense, and maybe Tyreek Hill's going to be out. There's a lot of question marks with Sammy Watkins. Right now, he's being drafted 24, just ahead of Tyreek Hill, ahead of DJ Moore, Alshon Jeffrey, Allen Robinson, and right behind Calvin Ridley. Tyler Lockett is ADP 21 right now, and Mike Williams ADP 23. I don't think that's a bad spot for Watkins. I've got him a little higher, mostly because I'm expecting Tyreek Hill to be out for a while. Now, the last piece of news that I want to talk about before we do get into these boomer bust players is that Josh Gordon. We haven't been really talking about him too much just because he's an afterthought at this point. We don't know how long he would be suspended, if he's even going to be reinstated, but he was catching passes from Tom Brady, I think, last week. Do you think that he's somebody that if you're playing in a best ball league, you might want to share of in the last round?
In best ball leagues, absolutely. And it really depends on your strategy, too. I know for me, I haven't grabbed that much of Josh Gordon because I normally have my receivers filled out and I'm pretty confident in them. But in the rare times where I do go, zero receiver, or I feel like I'm thin at that position, he's an ideal guy to grab in the late rounds. And even in redraft leagues, you can do that, where you spend that late round pick, which you're probably going to drop, a week or two into the season anyway, when you find out that player's not that great. So why not grab Josh Gordon, hold him, find out what happens, and just see, because we know if he's in that offense, the reports so far on N'Keal Harry haven't been glowing. He's got a lot of talent. He's a good player, a lot of potential there. But, he's a rookie, so some of the rookies take a little bit longer to catch on. And we saw what Josh Gordon can do in that offense. It's great that Brady's taking him under his wing a little bit, that they're, passing and spending some time together in the offseason. So hopefully this is good for Josh Gordon, but we still don't know. It's another situation where the NFL is definitely not transparent with this stuff. So anything is possible here. We could see him end up reinstated before the season. We could see him miss another entire year. And I don't feel like we've gotten any reports that have sort of led us one way or the other at this point.
Agree. I think it's possible he plays 16 games. I think it's possible he plays 0. I think if I had to put the over-under, I'd put it at 8 games, right there in the middle. Now, if I had to do an over-under for N'Keal Harry game started, based on what we've been hearing, I'd probably put it at 8 games as well. And Josh Gordon's a superior wide receiver, at least at this point in their career. N'Keal Harry's going wide receiver 38. Does that mean that we should draft Gordon around that range? I mean, obviously we don't have to, but if we had to, would you take him ahead of Cortland Sutton, Larry Fitzgerald, DK Metcalf?
No, I just think it's too volatile of a situation for me that I would still hold him back. I would probably still take Harry in that range from what we know now.
Okay, I was going to say, this is my takeaway, is that Harry's going way too high if he's, I think, pretty much the same as Josh Gordon.
I think Harry's going to play. I still think the odds are against Gordon, being there. Like you said, maybe half the season, maybe we could see that, but he's coming off, he's had longer suspensions in the past. So if we think they're going to be that relaxed on him this time, I'm not sure what the precedent would be there, but I think Harry around 40 or so. I know I moved him down a little bit in my last update just because those reports that came out weren't, the most positive about him. But I still think right now the way we have to look at it is that Harry's going to, be a big part of that offense, not having a tight end that you can rely on at this point, not really having anyone other than Julian Edelman in that receiving corps that you can rely on. Harry might not have been ready in OTAs, but they're going to do everything they can to have him ready for week 1 because I do think they're going to need him.
Interesting. Maybe it would be like Belichick to kind of talk him down and everything, and then he just comes out there and he's a monster, right? So I don't know. I don't have any shares of N'Keal Harry right now. He was my favorite wide receiver in this draft class. I just don't love the landing spot, right? We've got Tom Brady around quarterback 20 in fantasy football this year. Harry's his number 2, kind of number 3, because you've got James White as well. Maybe Philip Dorsett passes him, or Harry's not ready right away. I think I'd rather take a shot on Equanimeous St. Brown, Paris Campbell, somebody along those lines, even Devontae Parker, and I know that's going to make some of you guys cringe. But I like those situations a little bit more.
I'm with you on Paris Campbell for sure. Paris Campbell, I think, is going to surprise a lot of people this season. And he's a guy that it seems like that offense knows exactly what they want to do with him, and they're very confident. He's a guy that every report's been glowing about him. And from what we've seen, and from the videos that we've seen that came out of practice, he looks like he belongs already.
Yes, he does. He's T.Y. Hilton, I think. And I like him a lot more than Devin Funchess. I know some people are in the Devin Funchess bandwagon. I'm all about Paris Campbell.
Yeah, they're just very different receivers, right? I think Campbell's much more dynamic. I think Funchess his chance is gonna be to essentially be the Eric Ebron this year in that offense, right? To catch some touchdowns. He's not gonna put up huge yardage there, but he's gonna give them a big body on the outside and probably gonna hurt Eric Ebron. But I think that might be a name we're gonna talk about a little bit later.
Let's actually start with Eric Ebron because I do have him on the list, and I'm not especially excited about Eric Ebron. Yeah, he did catch the touchdowns. Yeah, he did seem to steal the starting job from Jack Doyle. At least that's what people think. But did you know that when Jack Doyle was back, Eric Ebron played 40% of the snaps all 3 games?
I did know that, unfortunately, because I was one of the people who saw that coming and decided I was going to just get rid of every Ebron share at that point because I was going to get ahead of it. And I was so huge on Ebron last year. Before the season, I had done a bold prediction saying I thought he could be in the top 5. I thought he was going to get double-digit touchdowns. So I had him a bunch of places. And before Doyle came back, sold off all those shares. And I was vindicated in the fact that, yeah, his playing time went way down, but he was still scoring touchdowns. And then Doyle got hurt again.
On like 3 targets.
And Ebron continued to put up big numbers. So
yeah.
This year, though, I'm on the complete opposite end of the spectrum where I was last year. I think Ebron is someone I'm going to stay away from almost everywhere. I mean, if he falls quite a bit, maybe I'll touch him, but The touchdown regression is definitely coming. We know he had 14 total touchdowns, I believe it was last year. He's not going to do that again. That's not just because Doyle is going to be back. We assume Doyle still has that hip issue that he's overcoming. It seems like he's going to be okay. It's not just because of that, though. It's because of all the guys we just talked about, right? Devin Funchess and Paris Campbell. And there's all these, even the beat writers are talking up Mo Alley Cox, the third tight end in that offense, as a potential breakout guy.
He is an athletic freak, isn't he, Justin?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that made me really drawn to Ebron last year was the fact that they really didn't have anyone else, and he was kind of the second receiver behind T.Y. Hilton in that offense. Well, guess what? This year, that's not going to be the case, so I don't really want him anywhere. I would say that straight out. Like I said, I know it depends. His ADP, sometimes guys fall and you're willing to grab him somewhere, but I think he's in trouble. He's barely hanging on at my top 10 for tight ends.
I've got him tight end number 10 behind Njoku at 7, Jared Cook at 8, Trey Burton at 9, who was quite good last year. And if it was just the touchdown regression, I'd probably have him down in this range. I don't even know if he's going to start, though. So I've got him tight end 10. That doesn't mean if it's, 9 tight ends off the board and I don't have a tight end, I'm taking Ebron. I'd wait a long time. I think there's a big drop-off between, tight end number 3 and number 4. Tight end number 5, Hunter Henry, and number 6, Evan Ingram. And then after that, between Jared Cook and Trey Burton, there's a huge drop-off. And if I don't have a tight end by then, I'm just waiting until the very end. I'll take Kyle Rudolph, or I'll take, one of these guys, Vance McDonald. He won't be there if I'm in a tags draft, obviously. A Jimmy Graham I would take, or just a big flyer or a streamer for week 1. If I don't have a tight end at that point, I don't care. So I'm not going to have any shares of Eric Ebron.
Yeah, I almost completely agree with you there. The only thing I will say is maybe I'm with tags. I have Vance McDonald in that Trey Burton spot, sort of that tier right after Jared Cook. But I agree, those are where the breaks are in the tiers for me as well. And going back to Ebron, one other thing with the Colts I think is very important to think about with this offense. They became a heck of a running team down the stretch last year. Once Marla Mack came back, they were fantastic. That offensive line now, I've been likening them to, what the Cowboys built a few years back. They're that good.
It's the best in the league.
Yeah, it's right up there. And I think they're going to win a lot of games. I think that running game is going to do a lot of work for them. I don't know that the volume's going to be as high. I don't know that it's going to, they're going to need to throw as much, which then makes you worry again about how many receivers are going to be able to be supported in that offense. It's just another knock against Ebron.
Man, I'm looking at Marla Mack's game log right now. I can't believe how many carries he was getting down the stretch. 19 against Houston, 25 against Denver, 16 against Jacksonville, 15 against Houston, 14, 27, 25. They were just feeding him the rock.
And Frank Reich's been very clear that he's the guy, that Nyheim Hines will mix in on some third downs, but that Marla Mack is their guy. No, going to the offseason, there was a little bit of worry. They were a team that, could have signed a Le'Veon Bell, could have drafted a Josh Jacobs. They didn't. They're confident in Marlon Mack, and really, I think you just have to be confident in that offense, having Andrew Luck and having that offensive line. And I did an article yesterday talking about different handcuff situations, and I went through all 32 teams. And there's some teams where you don't even want to consider the handcuff, obviously. But when I talked about the Colts, I pointed out that just because of how good that offensive line is, you need to know all the names in that backfield. So you need to know that Jordan Wilkins is still there. You need to know who the winner of Jordan Wilkins and Spencer Ware is going to be, who's going to essentially be the Marlon Mack backup, because Nyheim Hines is more the passing down guy.
That'd be a good situation to fall into if Mack was to get hurt.
If Mack goes down, one of those guys, whoever wins that job, is going to be the biggest waiver wire pickup that week.
Yep, I agree with that. We've been talking about guys with upside in this range. Todd Gurley's now in this range. Dalvin Cook. You got Aaron Jones, Leonard Fournette, Josh Jacobs. We've seen a bunch of these guys have big explosive games, and I think it kind of gets lost that Marlon Mack had a couple big explosive games too. Do you think there's a chance that Marlon Mack ends the season in that top tier with Barkley, Elliott, McCaffrey, Kamara?
I don't think he's that kind of back. I don't think he's going to get enough receiving production to put him up with those guys. So I think his ceiling's probably, the low end RB1, maybe behind like the Mixons, like sort of right behind in that Dalvin Cook range. In the top 10, though, he definitely has that potential.
Okay. All right. So like James Conner territory. Let's move on and talk about another tight end. And this is someone I think people forget just how amazing he was before his injury. Now, we don't know what he's going to be like when he comes back, but he's going to be the starter, and he was never the starter before, and he was still incredible. It's Hunter Henry. Is he going to be able to get enough targets in this offense with Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Melvin Gordon? Or is it just kind of, I don't know, it's just too risky?
I think the injury just delayed the breakout. And the fact that he was able to actually come back for the playoffs. Now, no one remembers that, but he did come back and play in a playoff game. I think he only got about, I think it was like 14 snaps or something. He made zero impact in that game. He probably shouldn't have even come back, but I think they tried to bring him back, and he was healthy enough to be sort of a decoy in a few plays. But that's at least a great sign that he's going to be healthy for this season. Now, you can go back all the way back to that rookie year, and, he had all the touchdowns as a rookie. He scored 8 touchdowns that year. He was still playing behind Antonio Gates back then, and Gates, I think, scored 7 touchdowns himself that year. That's how much Phillip Rivers loves using his tight ends, and that's still the case. They just, last year they didn't really have the tight end like a Henry or like, Antonio Gates in his prime to use. And now with Tyrell Williams gone, with Antonio Gates gone, I do think Henry is going to get enough targets because I think he's going to be the de facto number 3 in that offense behind, the 2 top receivers. So I think that there's a lot of signs that Henry has the talent. Now, this is all before injury, so you never know when you have a big injury. It is, like you said, it's possible he could come back, look a little bit different. But, when you go back to that rookie year, averaged 8 yards per target as a rookie, and that puts him in pretty elite company. I know Ian Hartitz tweeted that out a while back. The guys that were on that list were, that was some big names if you could do that as a rookie. Everything was set up for the breakout last year, and I think everything's set up for the breakout this year as well. So if you miss out on those elite 3 tight ends, I have OJ Howard, right behind them. I think OJ Howard is the guy that I would want right after them. And then Hunter Henry behind him, like you said before.
How high would you take Hunter Henry? Because I'm with you. I am all in on Hunter Henry. I got all the shares last year before his injury, and some people can say he was a bust. Come on, guys. He just got hurt. That doesn't mean that he changed as a player.
Probably right around where his ADP is, I think. I don't know if I'd want to go much higher than that. So around the 6th round, I'd be willing to go for him. I'd have OJ Howard probably around ahead in the 5th. And then those top tier guys are going. I'm not in the club that would take Kelce in the 1st round. I would take him in the 2nd. And then I would look at, Kittle later in the 2nd, early 3rd, and then Ertz probably late 3rd, sort of in that range. And then after those guys, I'm not as excited about, Evan Ingram. They brought in a bunch of different guys. It's not the same situation.
Roger Lewis was their number 2 wide receiver the last time Evan Ingram went off.
Exactly.
And he didn't really go off. He was extremely inconsistent.
All the stats of what he did without Beckham, they're very relevant. But right now, everyone's healthy. Right now, Sterling Shepard's healthy. They brought in Golden Tate. We know Saquon Barkley's there, and he's going to catch a ton of passes. So that, limits Ingram a little bit. I do like Jared Cook, even though he's a complete unknown right now in New Orleans. I like him quite a bit, but Henry's still well ahead of those guys.
Yeah. I said Ingram was inconsistent. That's not true. Evan Ingram was inefficient. He was remarkably inefficient. He got so many targets, and he hardly did anything with them. Hunter Henry is the exact opposite. This is why I'm not drafting many shares of Mike Williams. I like Mike Williams, not as much as Tags, and there's going to be someone in your league who likes him more. I just think Hunter Henry is going to be the main guy in the red zone. He was awesome.
I still like Williams there. I think they'll probably cannibalize each other a little bit, but I think there'll be enough to go around. I think that offense is going to score a lot of touchdowns, so I'm not sure that's the problem. I think yardage-wise, I would be a little more worried when you're talking about volume in that passing game because they're another team like the Colts, going to win a lot of games. They've leaned on the run more as Rivers has gotten older. Melvin Gordon's a heck of a back, so it's smart to do that. And they also have Austin Eckler out of the backfield, so it's a pretty good tandem back there. So I think touchdowns will be fine. I think yardage we might have to look at, but I still think both guys are going to be great for fantasy.
So let me ask you this. I think I know the answer, but if you're not willing to reach for Hunter Henry in the 5th round, you think it gets ugly after that. Who are you going to go for if you don't have a tight end by then?
Jared Cook would be one of them, and he would be, a round or so later. And then after that, I'm probably going to wait like you. It depends, Vance McDonald is someone I'd be interested in. And then behind that, we're looking at, Chris Herndon. We'll see what happens with suspension potentially for him. I'd still be willing to, grab him and just play someone else those first couple weeks though. But those guys are going to go way later. I'm not spending an early pick by any means. I'm not spending a pick in the first 10 rounds on guys like that. I'm going to want them to fall to me. Mark Andrews with the Ravens, he's someone who has a lot of potential as well. But at that point, you're just, you're going to hope you're going to play and try to get a Noah Fant or someone who could potentially step up and have a big year that you're going to be able to get in the final rounds of your draft.
You're playing the waiver wire game at that point.
Pretty much at that point, yeah.
Yeah, let's move on over to a new position. We've got a bunch of running backs to talk about because a lot of them are boomer bust. We'll start with the big one, Todd Gurley. What do you think about this situation, Justin?
Oh, I hate talking about Todd Gurley. Okay, so we really don't know all the details. Obviously, the team has kept it very closed door. They've there's only little things have leaked out here and there, and it seems to all be negative. And I think what we have to look at now is what we can guarantee is Gurley is not going to be a workhorse anymore. That is 100% for sure. But it seems like everyone's acting like his career is just completely over. And maybe it's because at this point in the year, a lot of people are doing dynasty drafts or working on their dynasty teams. And in dynasty, I get it. Longevity-wise for his career now, we have to be very worried. And I would be trying to unload as well if you could get something decent for him. But when you're looking at redraft this year, even if he's not a workhorse, he was putting up such big numbers that even if he's not a workhorse, he could still be an extremely productive back. He could still be a low-end RB1. I just don't think he has the upside to be the number one overall fantasy player anymore. I don't think that's going to happen. I think now that you have Henderson there, you're going to look at it and they're going to do more of a 60-40 split maybe. But when you look at Gurley's numbers the last couple of years, he had almost 4,000 yards from scrimmage in the last 2 years. It was over 3,900. He had 40 touchdowns in 2 years, right? So when you're looking at that, averages of 1,900 yards and 20 touchdowns a season, well, what if we break that down and it ends up being 1,300 yards and 10 touchdowns? Because that would still make him a low-end RB1. And that's where I have him ranked at this point, because I think that's what we're looking at. We're going to see Henderson step up and maybe pick up the rest of that. The offense is still going to be really good. I just think it's as long as expectations are sort of shifted. But if people still think they're getting the Gurley that's been there the last couple of years, that is definitely not true. But I also don't think that his career is completely over at this point, like some people are sort of acting.
So Todd Gurley, the last 2 years combined, averaged 22.7 touches per game. What would you project him at this year?
I think we would probably bump that down more into the 15 range.
In the 15 range? Yeah, that's not that much.
I think, and obviously, it's going to be 13 some weeks. It'll be up to 17, 18 some weeks, but I think it'll be more around there. And that offense is so good and he's so efficient with his touches that I still think he's going to be able to put up, decent numbers.
So we're lopping off 33% of his touches. I would assume that would mean we're also lopping off 33% of his fantasy points. Now, in the past 2 years, he scored 632 standard league fantasy points. Okay, so let's put it into the calculator here. He would have had 420 if you take 33% of that off. Do you know where that would have put him?
Where would that have put him?
That would have put him as the running back number 6, just behind Ezekiel Elliott and Christian McCaffrey.
So even if it's a little worse than that, right? Even if it's a little lower. Even if you
take 33% off, he's 80 points better than running back 7.
Yeah, I mean, I still think people get a little too worried sometimes, and every injury is different. And I think it's recency bias, right? What we saw of him when he came back in the playoffs wasn't good. It was not the Gurley we were used to seeing. But now he's going to have the offseason. He's going to be rehabbing, doing everything he can to get ready. And the team was smart. Then they made sure they still have Malcolm Brown there as well. So they make sure they have guys who are going to be able to spell him. And they're going to use him. This is a smart team. This is a smart offense. It's a good organization. And they're going to get the most of him. And I still think fantasy owners can feel confident grabbing him in, you're going to wait until the mid to late second round. I've seen him drop into the third round. If he hits the third round, I'm more than happy to grab him.
I'll take those shares.
Yeah, I think for sure. Because I that offense and what we've seen from him, we would have to get a very negative report that would come out. We'd have to get something concrete that came out and actually said, because right now it's just sort of all the perception of the situation is going the wrong way. And in the offseason, that can happen. It can happen both ways, right? Where You get the slightly positive stories coming out, and all of a sudden everyone's moving in that direction, and you see ADPs go up, and it completely changes the perception of a player. Unfortunately for Gurley, it's been negative. But like I said, I would advise that in dynasty leagues, if you can still get something for him, definitely try to move him at this point.
All right, next running back is Damian Williams. He's going quite a bit later. I'm looking at his game log last year. 8 carries, 10 carries, 13 carries, 11 carries. He was catching the ball a little bit, but this concerns me for everyone thinking, hey, this guy's got the job. He's a workhorse. I don't know if he can do it. We know that Carlos Hyde can do it. We know that Carlos Hyde this time last year was considered much more talented than Damian Williams. You watch him on tape, I don't really see much of a difference. They're different types of players, but in terms of talent level, I still think Carlos Hyde is better. I think he's going to win this job. Does that concern you at all, Justin, or do you think it's definitely Damian Williams?
I think it's definitely Damian Williams. I do. I haven't liked what I've seen from Hyde in his last few stops. I don't think he's been very efficient. The team seemed to give the blueprint of what they were going to do with Williams. At the beginning of the offseason, they said, he's going to be our guy. And then when they went out and signed Hyde, everyone got worried. And then we knew the draft was coming. And the draft is what worried me more, to be honest, because I thought they were going to go potentially take somebody in the first few rounds. And they didn't. They got Darwin Thompson. It was a day 3 pick. He projects to be more of a pass catcher. I think Williams right now, when you're looking at what he did late last season, 572 yards from scrimmage, 6 touchdowns over those final 4 games. That was going into the playoffs as well. Then during that stretch, they signed him to a 2-year extension. I think that was very telling, right? That was, okay, we got something in this guy. Is there a possibility that he can't handle the workload? 100%. I did an article early in the offseason, risky picks to gamble on, and he was in that because there's a lot of risk associated with him. This is by no means a guarantee at all. But when you're looking at that offense, what they've been able to do, how prolific they can be, even if Tyreek Hill isn't there for part of the season, that is still a very talented offense with a great quarterback, a good coaching, good offensive line. So for me, if we're going boom or bust today, it's boom all the way for Williams at this point. I think he's got, he's a top 15 RB in my opinion. And a lot of it has to do with the system and the offense. I think he's a good back. I don't think he's going to, be the difference. I don't think he's an elite player. I think a lot of it's the situation. But to me, it seems pretty clear that they're going to give him a chance to do it.
So if you're convinced that he's definitely the starter, he's in Andy Reid's offense, he scored 10 touchdowns in 6 games, including the playoffs. His ADP right now is running back 13. Why don't you have him quite a bit higher than that? I mean, we saw Spencer Ware be a monster. Kareem Hunt was a monster. Jamal Charles was a monster. Whoever it is in this Chiefs offense with Andy Reid is going to be the dude. If I knew Damian Williams was definitely starting, I'd probably draft him RB8, RB9. But because we don't know, I've got him down around RB20, and I've got Spencer Ware a few spots behind him at RB26.
The way I do my rankings is once I have the projection, there's other factors that sort of come into play, right? And one of them is the risk factor. I look at a player and it's how confident am I? I'm confident that he is going to be the guy. I think the risk is more like you pointed out. Is he going to be able to hold up as the guy? He's never done that before. We don't have the proof of that. So that's the part that I bake in the risk or the gamble, if you want to call it. And I drop him down a few spots because of that.
All right, Derrick Henry. He was incredible at the end of last year. We thought that that's what he was going to be, and then they went out and signed Dion Lewis, and they gave Lewis a bunch of touches, and Henry was a turd. A lot of people actually dropped him. Some people just kept him on their bench, and so they missed out on all those points. What is he going to be this year? Are the Titans going to be boneheads again, or are they going to let the big dog eat?
I'm not as convinced as everyone else that he's this great back, right? And I spoke about recency bias in the last one. I think so much of that is going to affect Henry. When you look at, what he did his first 2 NFL seasons, he was outside the top 24 fantasy backs. And part of that was, DeMarco Murray was there at one point, so there were some other factors as well. But then through the first 12 games last year, and part of it was because Dion Lewis was getting involved, but he was the RB34 in standard leagues. And standard leagues is where Derrick Henry should be eating. And then, he didn't top 60 rushing yards in any contest in the first 3 months of the season. And so I think, like you pointed out, a lot of his fantasy owners probably did not make the playoffs, so didn't have a chance to capitalize on the big numbers. Then he comes out and puts up the huge numbers. I also think it's important to look at each game and sort of who he did that against. He did it against, the biggest game was that, 238-yard, 4-touchdown game that he had. That was against the Jags, and at that point in the season, it was right around the time when the Jags realized they weren't going to make the playoffs, and they were very demoralized.
They had huge locker room problems. Everybody hated each other.
100%, because they almost made it to the Super Bowl the year before, and I think they just assumed that they were going to be competing for a Super Bowl again. And when that team realized around that point in the season that they weren't going to make the playoffs, things went off the rails. And that was a game where it just looked like the Titans enforced their will over them, and Henry just crushed them for that huge game. Then the next two games, they played the Giants and the Redskins, who were both awful teams last season. The Giants had gotten rid of Snacks Harrison at that point, so their run defense wasn't as good.
They went from one of the better run defenses to the single worst run defense after Harrison left.
Totally. And these matchups are important, right? Because you just think back, or I'm not saying you specifically, but everyone thinks back and goes, oh, in the last month of the season, Derrick Henry's amazing. It's going to do it again, right? And then at the end of the year, in week 17, they played the Colts, who were already looking ahead to the playoffs, and they didn't need that game at all. And he didn't have a huge game that week, but he had a good game. So when you look at those opponents, that's important, right? It's another variable that you have to add to all of it. So I still think Henry, if the team is smart, should be a low-end RB2. I have him ranked right around that range. But I'm not going to get overly excited and put him in my top 20 or my top 15. I just don't think that he's going to be that guy. I don't think he's going to get involved in the passing game enough. Dion Lewis is still there. They're still going to use him in that respect. I'm just not sold on Henry.
His average draft position, and by the way, if you guys all want to see this, you can go to the FantasyPros homepage, hover over NFL, and click on 2019 rankings there on the left, and you'll be able to sort it by ADP, or you can sort it by rank, which is the expert consensus ranking. So Derrick Henry's ADP is 18, his ECR is 16. That's ahead of Aaron Jones, Josh Jacobs. I can't do it. I get it that there's some upside, but in half PPR leagues, full PPR leagues, there's not that much upside because he only caught 15 balls last year. And I'm looking at the last 4 weeks of the season, going back to 2014, and some of these guys that are at the top, like Derrick Henry, C.J. Anderson in 2014. You remember that? And then everyone panicked and overdrafted him next year. Tim Hightower in 2015. Rashad Jennings right behind him in 2015. Rashad Jennings, guys. 2016. Bilal Powell. 2017. All right, we got Dion Lewis was up there. Every single year there's a guy like this, and we all get really excited, and we all overdraft him. Last year it happened to wide receivers too. Keelan Cole. It happens every single year. Happens with quarterbacks as well. And I think we just need to chill it a little bit with Derrick Henry.
And when we're talking about different things that I factor in when I'm doing my rankings, another one of them, when you're talking about the unknown, is another change in offensive coordinator for the Titans. So that we don't know what's going to happen, right? You would have thought last year that they would have just given the ball to Henry like they did late in the season, early in the year. And, they didn't. And who knows what could happen with the new coordinator, right? Like, we have to take a look at that. And
it could also be a plus. They could give him 25 carries a game.
It's possible. It's definitely possible. So it's another unknown there, which, when you add in the unknowns, that I equate that to risk, and that bumps a player down a little bit for me.
All right, let's go another running back here. It's Sony Michel with the New England Patriots. I'm just worried about his knee. I like the situation. I like the talent just fine. He's going to get in the end zone if he's healthy. But the knee.
This one I feel like I want to cry on because
I
really like Sony Michel.
Just draft Damian Harris too and you're fine. Same player.
I guess, yeah. I mean, I was very excited about Michel at the start of the offseason. I thought he was going to be okay, and then when we hear, it's a knee scope, so it's not, the end of the world. And they're saying that
it's not nothing though either.
Well, it's not nothing. And when you're talking about a player that had injury concerns and all these red flags coming into the league and then missed time last year as well, now he's getting surgery done in his first offseason in the NFL. That's just, it's very, very worrisome. When he was on the field, he was fantastic though last year. And I think we could all admit that, especially late in the year during that playoff run, he absolutely killed it. He didn't contribute much in the passing game. He's another guy. I think he has the skills, though, to do it. I just don't think they used him that way. I mean, they have James White there. But now you start to wonder, a year after using a first-round pick to get him, they're using a third-round pick to get Harris. That's another big, big red flag.
Huge red flag, yes.
Yeah, a team like and as much as the Patriots are definitely becoming more of a running team. And in the last few years, as Brady's gotten older, they've shifted more towards the run, and they've had a very good rushing offense, which is another reason why you want to invest in that backfield. Even with that, a year after, to use another high pick like that on a running back, it's a bad sign for Michelle. And then we, miss his time in OTAs. We find out why. They were kind of not surprising that the Patriots would be keeping that from everyone, but I would be willing to invest in him. I'm curious to see where his ADP is going to fall here. I think right now it's around the 5th round, I believe.
Yeah, RB20 right now. He's going right behind Josh Jacobs, right in front of Kerryon Johnson, Mark Ingram, Chris Carson, yeah.
In that low-end RB2 range is where I would still take him. That's where I bumped him down to. But before that, I had him up in my top 15. I was very excited. Yeah, I was very excited about him this year. But you got to be able to stay on the field, and he's not showing us that he can do that.
His ADP's been plummeting, and for a while it was like, I'm not drafting Sony Michel. And at this point, it's like, all right, I guess I'll have some shares. If his ADP is going to go here, there's not as much risk in spending a 6th-round pick, right?
Yeah, I mean, at that point, you still have a chance. And like you said, if you're going to spend a 5th or 6th on Michel, and then you're going to spend, a later pick to get Harris, you're probably going to be okay at that point. And that's not, as big of an investment where if you're talking about Gurley at this point, you want to get Gurley in the 2nd or 3rd, and then you want to get Henderson. Henderson's price has gone way up, so it's much harder to do something like that.
And it's not like the 49ers where you have no idea who's going to start every single game. If Sony Michel's on the field, he's playing. If he's not, Damian Harris is playing. I think that's pretty easy. Guys, today's show is brought to you by PristineAuction.com. You guys have heard me talk about them. There are so many great values. Pretty much every single day I jump in and check to see what kind of values there are. And if there's something I think is going to look great in my office, I'll go ahead and get it because there's awesome values out there. Everything's guaranteed authentic from only the most trusted sources. No matter who your team is, what your hobbies are, what you like, you're going to be able to find some awesome memorabilia for your cave or your office. Check out PristineAuction.com, PRISTINE auction.com. And when you register for them, make sure to put in the registration code. That's a field at the top of the registration page. You put in FantasyPros, all one word. That'll get you a $5 credit. And we have a giveaway going on through Pristine Auction right now where we're giving away a signed Travis Kelce Chiefs helmet. You can check this out at fantasypros.com/contest. And it takes about 30 seconds to enter. And thank you for leaving all your reviews. All right, let's keep moving on. We've got a couple more running backs to talk about here, Justin. Phillip Lindsey. Are you worried about Royce Freeman, or did Phillip Lindsey just earn this job?
I am worried about Royce Freeman. I don't know if that's so much a knock on Lindsey, though. And we know he had the huge year last year. The two big questions are Freeman and the injury. I think the injury is not as much of a concern. It's a wrist injury, right? So for a running back, as long as he's going to be able to get back to the field in training camp, which by all accounts, that's what the team has said. I know we're over. He had a 4 to 6 month recovery timeline, and he's past that now. But that's probably just the Broncos being safe with it and making sure that he's going to be healthy. They know what they have in him, so hopefully he's going to be back for training camp. And when it's an injury to the wrist, there's no cardio issues or anything at that point, right? He's able to stay completely in shape and hit the ground running as soon as that wrist is healthy. So I'm not as worried about the injury. Now, what the problem with the injury has been is that it's allowed Freeman to potentially impress the new coaching staff, to get a little more time. And he's a decent back, and he was drafted last year, and Lindsey was not, right? It's not that really makes too much of a difference after the year Lindsey had, but especially with the new coaching staff and stuff coming in, I don't think they're too worried about that. But the team is probably going to try to get Freeman involved a little more, if only to keep Lindsey healthy. So to me, I think that both these guys could put up good fantasy value. The offense that they're putting in is more of that Kyle Shanahan type offense, which, if done successfully, the running game should be pretty good. And remember last year, they kept wanting to use Dante Booker. So hopefully they're not going to do that this year. Hopefully Freeman can pick up some of those stats as opposed to eating too much into Lindsey. And that way we could potentially have two guys that are fantasy viable. I'm looking at Lindsey as more around the low end RB2 range, around that, 20, maybe a little bit lower than that. And I think for me, Freeman, each time I do my rankings, he's been creeping up. And part of it is because all the positive things we've heard out of the Broncos camp. And I know, Cecil Lammey is, does the Audible podcast with football guys. He's around Broncos practice all the time. I can credit him for the reason that I have Phillip Lindsey in our Dynasty League together, because last year he was the first one to make a comment that Lindsey stood out in practice, and I went out and picked him up and just stashed him, and it turned out pretty well. This year, Cecil Lammey is saying that Freeman is looking fantastic and that he's definitely going to have a role. So I want to trust that again. He did me right last year. So I do think Freeman is going to be more involved. I'm hoping that it's eating into all those numbers that Booker weirdly had last year and not too much into Lindsey. And I think they both could end up potentially in the 20s at the end of the year.
You know, I said boomer bust for Phillip Lindsey because he did finish as a top 10 running back, at least when he played last year. In those first 15 weeks, he was RB9, ahead of Joe Mixon, ahead of David Johnson, ahead of Nick Chubb, Derrick Henry, Aaron Jones, all these guys, Chris Carson, who was great at the end of the year as well. And I think that's what people think is his ceiling. That's the boom, right? I don't think that's going to happen, though, because Freeman is going to be involved regardless of whether Lindsey's healthy. But I'm worried Lindsey might lose his job altogether. So I have no shares right now. His ADP is ADP 23. I've got him at 28. I've got Freeman right behind him at 31. Big believer in Royce Freeman.
From what we've heard from the coaching staff, it seems like they still view Lindsey as a big part of the offense. And the quote was something along those lines, that they still see him as a big part of the offense. So I'm still confident that he's going to have a pretty big role there. But like I said, I hope that it's sort of like the Gurley thing, right? Where when the negative vibes come around this time of year, people take it way too far. And like you pointed out, yeah, he put up, I think even at the end of the year, he was the RB13 Lindsey was last season. So he's probably not going to get back there. But if he drops down to the low end RB2 range and Freeman bumps up a bit, they both could still have fantasy value, as opposed to people looking at it like, all right, it's going to be Freeman's backfield and Lindsey's going to be just tossed aside. I don't think that's going to happen.
All right, let's keep moving on. I want to touch on Mark Ingram. Ingram was great the last few years, but we're excited about Latavius Murray because he's a product of Sean Payton's offense. Doesn't that mean the reverse, that Mark Ingram leaving Sean Payton's offense could mean, hey, maybe he's actually not very good? We're about to find out. It's a good situation because Baltimore's going to run the ball so much. But I think Justice Hill might be the best running back on this team. I think he's Phillip Lindsey, but bigger and stronger and faster. I think that he's going to steal the job from Mark Ingram before long.
I like that. It's a bold prediction. I like that because I do like Hill as well. I think this could be another situation where this running game, we know when Lamar Jackson took over, they ran the ball more than any team. On the year, it was the Seahawks, but after Jackson took over from that point on, it was the Ravens.
Not even close either.
And not even close either. And I think we have to expect that even though it might not be that high again, it's definitely, they're going to be up there as one of the highest running teams. So I think we could have a situation where you have multiple backs putting up stats. And late last year, we saw that as well. And the names weren't as sexy. It was Gus Edwards and Kenneth Dixon doing it. And, Gus Edwards would have 100 yards, no receptions, and maybe a touchdown. And then you'd have, Dixon put up 50 yards and a touchdown or something. But they were both able to put up some fantasy numbers. I definitely think Mark Ingram is better than Gus Edwards. So I think Ingram is going to take that role. And I definitely think that Justice Hill is better than Kenneth Dixon. So I think they've upgraded at both spots here. And I really like what Ingram did. Ingram, I know he's friends with Alvin Kamara, but when you're the guy and then someone else comes in and sort of usurps you, you definitely want to still be the guy. So he found a spot where I think they're going to let him do that. There's going to be enough carries to go around. And one of the interesting things here, Edwards was the RB11 in standard leagues, the RB18 in PPR formats last year, and he wasn't catching any passes. Now, that's the last 6 games, obviously. That wasn't the whole season. That was just from the point where he started. But he had 1 target during that time, right? He was not involved in the passing game whatsoever. Ingram is a very efficient receiver. He can catch the ball. So I think in this offense, everyone's a little bit worried that they didn't throw the ball to the running backs as much last season. But we saw a video come out recently from the Ravens, and it was from their practices and OTAs, and there was a ton of passes to Mark Ingram. And it wasn't just dump offs. They were throwing to him down the sidelines as well. So that was actually pretty exciting. I forget who retweeted it when I saw it. I'd like to give them credit, but that is very important because if Ingram's going to be involved in the passing game as well, and they're going to throw to the backs more, that's going to help what I'm saying. It's going to help the possibility that 2 guys could be fantasy viable in that offense that still is going to run a whole bunch.
Yes. I mean, Ingram could get 20 carries a game, right? If he's the actual starter, I think he's got top 12 running back upside.
Yeah, he's a more versatile north-south runner than Edwards was, and that was one of the reasons they put Edwards in there last year. It's because he had that north-south running style more than an Alex Collins who kind of danced a little bit behind the line, right? So Ingram has caught a ton of passes in the past, though, right? Had 3 straight seasons with at least 46 receptions, so he is a very good receiver as well. I think Justice Hill is. It's going to be interesting to see what they do. I think both those guys I want to own, though, in fantasy this year.
Agree. All right, let's move on to Derrius Guice out with Washington. I know a lot of people think he's just going to walk back into this job, but Adrian Peterson, we talked about it last show, was actually really good last season. I think that Adrian Peterson's the starter. I think that Derrius Guice is a bust, but if he's the starter, he's got a lot of upside too, right?
Guice has so much upside. I mean, the talent is definitely there. The concerns are the injury and then specifically what the team has done this offseason. So when they brought back Adrian Peterson, that was very, very worrisome in my mind because Peterson is not a guy that wants to sit on the bench. Unless something's changed, when he was in New Orleans and Alvin Kamara overtook him and it turned into the Alvin Kamara Ingram backfield, Peterson was not happy with that. Everyone remembers he clashed with Sean Payton over that. So I don't think he's going to want to come back to sit on the bench. Now, maybe they're just going to hold him into training camp, see where Guice is at, and then potentially just drop Peterson. And maybe that's their plan. But having Peterson there, staying, having Chris Thompson back healthy, he's probably going to be involved in passing down duties.
And they drafted Bryce Love.
Bryce Love, there's a possibility he's going to redshirt this year. I know there's been some talk of that, so maybe they'll give him the year off to recover from his injury, and maybe he could be the future Chris Thompson replacement. But with Peterson and Chris Thompson both there, I just worry that it caps Guice's upside a little bit. And then also coming off the injury, we don't know what the situation is there. We've seen some positive reports. We've seen some good videos of him, training. But his injury, it was delayed. He had those infections, had to have those surgeries, and it put him very far behind. And then also the Redskins offense, maybe Dwayne Haskins can come in and it'd be a little bit better than we thought. It can continue to develop. I wasn't a huge fan coming out, but he did show some development late in his college career over the last few games. Maybe he can bring that over and sort of kickstart this offense. I don't love the receiving core, though. I don't know that I want to invest very much in this Redskins offense. So when you add in all these different, things with the injury and the crowded backfield, and is it going to be a team that's going to win a lot of games and be able to run that much? I'm probably not going after Guice very many places, even though I think he's very talented.
Yeah, I think he's talented as well. I just think Adrian Peterson is the guy. We could talk about the 49ers backfield and everything. That's a whole big can of worms. And, we need to move on to some wide receivers anyway. I want to start with Kenny Golladay, who, after they traded Golden Tate, Marvin Jones was hurt, and then Kenny Golladay became the guy. But Marvin Jones is back. I think Marvin Jones is the number one wide receiver in this offense. He was again until the injury. He was on pace to be a top 12 fantasy wide receiver again after being top 5 the previous year. I think Kenny Golladay takes a back seat, but there's a chance he moves into that elite tier because he is a stud athlete.
I kind of like, you called this episode boom or bust. It's unfortunate because this one I kind of want to just go right down the middle. I think Galladay's going in about the right spot right now, which is late 4th round, sort of around wide receiver 20. I'm okay with that with him. And I do think Marvin Jones being back is going to, impact him a little bit. And, drafting TJ Hawkinson, that's another mouth to feed in the passing game as well. And then them just being completely focused on the run. That's what I think is going to be a bigger issue for Galladay's upside than anything. Just the volume of that offense. And I know recently it came out that Matthew Stafford played with an injury last year, that he had the back injury, but all year long, they were
a broken back, by the way.
Right. They were completely focused on the running game. And this offseason, they go out, they get Darrell Bevell, which is just doubling down on that run game again. I think that's my only concern with Golladay. I think the talent's there. I think he's going to need the touchdowns to keep him, in that range to really hit his ceiling. So I think he's going to be okay. I do think Marvin Jones is, it's nice having him back. I'm not worried about Danny Amendola whatsoever in the slot. I don't think Amendola is going to do very much. So if I had to pick, I would reluctantly maybe say boom, but I think right now he's just sort of being valued appropriately.
Yeah, right now his ADP is 17, ECR 18. I've got Kenny Golladay down at 21. Not especially excited.
So you're not that far off.
Yeah, not that far off. I'm just a really big fan of Marvin Jones this year, who I've actually got at wide receiver 20. So I won't need to take him there. Marvin Jones ADP right now is ADP 37. So I can get him like 3 rounds after. I'd be willing to take him if I had to. But okay, let's move on to another wide receiver here. It's DJ Moore. Now, Curtis Samuel ascended. Cam Newton was bad last year. No, it was the shoulder, but shoulders don't just always go away. It might pop back up. I'm just worried about what might happen to DJ Moore. Like maybe he's not the number one. Maybe they pass the ball to Christian McCaffrey 100 plus times again. Maybe Cam Newton doesn't even play. We saw it with Andrew Luck. Andrew Luck's supposed to be fine. His shoulder's going to be all right. And then he doesn't play the full season. I'm worried that might happen with Cam Newton. I won't say it's likely, but it is possible. And then DJ Moore could just be a breakout guy. Which one are you leaning towards?
I really don't like talking negative about players. It's one of my least favorite parts of the job. This is one where I get to be super positive because I really like DJ Moore. I'm very confident in him. Last year, limited touches, put up good stats. He didn't have like a 1,000-yard season, but he had 788 receiving yards, had 172 rushing yards as well, which is kind of interesting. The only things he was missing were the touchdowns and the targets. And I think, after they decided Devin Funchess wasn't coming back, and that was in the second half of the season, it seemed like the franchise was like, all right, we're out on Devin Funchess. And then they started to wean away from his snaps and give Moore work. And when that happened, Moore had at least 7 targets in 6 of the last 7 weeks. He was the wide receiver 27 in that span in fantasy. So everything I've heard about Cam Newton's recovery, I had the same, worries that you did. But everything seems to be going really well. I believe he was cleared to throw. I think I saw that. I think in OTAs, he wasn't cleared for full practice, but he seems to be a little bit further ahead of where Andrew Luck was when we had all those concerns about him. And I don't like the fact, because I think Cam Newton's a guy that his accuracy is already bad to begin with. So I think when you're talking about him missing time in the offseason, that's not great, but it seems like he's going to be healthy, as long as the shoulder didn't get re-hurt on that 10-hour plane ride where he didn't get the extra leg room. Hopefully, what a silly story that was. But with Newton on track to return, with Curtis Samuel as sort of a nice compliment, I like Samuel as well. Greg Olsen's winding down there, so I don't think there's much of a concern that he's going to be, the guy that he once was. I don't think there's a third receiver that's going to steal any significant targets there either. I mean, Torrey Smith or Chris Hogan, not really worried about those guys. Lord Aldrich, I think, is with the Panthers now, Aldrich Robinson, so not too worried about him, though. So in my mind, Moore's a lock to be in the top 30. This is a guy that's unbelievably talented. And I think he could challenge for wide receiver 2 status this year. And that's where I have him, right in the middle of the 20s there. I think he's a really, really good player and somebody who's being really underrated. In that range around the 6th round, you can get guys like Moore and Robbie Anderson and Dante Pettis. Those are guys that I think are going to help you win a title this year. You get those guys in the middle rounds and they end up putting up potentially wide receiver 2 numbers for you. You could fill out all your running back spots, grab, a high-end receiver too early on, and then in the 6th round, get, one of those guys. You're in really good shape.
I'm a really big Curtis Samuel guy, so a lot of people think that means I don't like DJ Moore. No, I love DJ Moore too. I just like Curtis Samuel a lot. DJ Moore started off the season 0 targets, 2 targets, bye week. A lot of people dropped him. 4 targets, 5, 6. Oh, that might be something too. And then all of a sudden at the end of the season, they gave him the ball a ton. I mean, he had fewer targets last year than Jordy Nelson, Cole Beasley, Taylor Gabriel, Willie Snead. He's going to get 100 plus targets this year, I would imagine. So if Cam Newton is healthy, they're going to throw the ball a lot more. I think that DJ Moore has a lot of upside. He's a very talented wide receiver. All right, Justin, let's move on to the last wide receiver, and then I've got one quarterback. You get to pick. Do you want to talk about James Washington or Geronimo Allison?
Well, in the vein of me saying that I want to be more positive, let's go with Geronimo Allison. So that sort of gives you my answer on James Washington anyway. Geronimo Allison, people forget that in the beginning of last year, the first 4 games before he got hurt, he was killing it. He was the wide receiver 27 in fantasy. He had stat lines 5 for 69 and 1, 6 for 64, 2 for 76 and 1, 6 for 80. And he was 20th among wide receivers in air yards over that span as well, which is, a very good stat that, I've definitely incorporated over the last few years into what I'm doing. The new offense could change things a little bit, but I think it's going to change things for the positive. I think Matt LaFleur bringing some more modern concepts to that offense should be a good thing as a whole. And I like Marquez Valdes-Scantling, and I know he's the one that's been getting all the hype recently, and it seems like Allison sort of wasn't getting any buzz early in the offseason, and then he had sort of a little spike in hype, and then recently it's been a little bit more of Valdes-Scantling, but I hope that Valdes-Scantling can improve. I hope he can give them a third option to take some attention away from Adams. But I think Allison's going to play in the slot, and I think those are going to be very valuable targets for him. And I think he's going to have a big year. I think we almost saw it last season, and I think this year we're definitely going to see it.
I've been really excited about Marquez Valdes-Scantling. I've mentioned Equanimeous St. Brown has some upside. Even Jake Kumaro. They've got Jamon Moore. They've got all these options. But it's just sitting right in front of us. Geronimo Allison was really good, and then he got hurt. He was on pace for 1,156 yards, 8 touchdowns, 76 receptions. If he would have just kept that pace for 16 games, yeah, that's asking a lot, but it was the pace he was on. 201.6 half PPR points would have made him the wide receiver 13 ahead of T.Y. Hilton, Amari Cooper, Kenny Golladay, all these guys. He was awesome.
Once again, you can't get too crazy over a small sample size when you look at it like that. But if you, instead of being the wide receiver 13, if we're talking about him as potentially, even just a wide receiver 3, I think would be, based on where he's going in drafts, you could get him in the 8th round, sometimes later. He's another one of those guys. I mentioned Anderson and Pettis and Moore. Allison's another one that I'm targeting, and I think could really fill out your receiving core that late in the draft and could be the wide receiver 3 on your team.
ADP 46 right now, going after Emmanuel Sanders, who's coming back from an Achilles, which isn't a thing. That doesn't happen. DK Metcalf, who might be the number 3 wide receiver on a team who threw the least of any team in the football last year. He's pretty raw. He's got a lot of upside, but I just don't understand passing on Geronimo Allison at that point when we know what Aaron Rodgers, number 2 receiver, has done so often in his career.
And without going into James Washington, we can tie these two together by saying these are passing offenses that you want to get pieces of. So whatever you think about, the Valdes-Scantlings, the Allisons, just make sure you sprinkle, you get a little bit of them. If you're doing these best ball drafts, don't just lock in on one guy. Make sure you got a few shares of the other. And in the Steelers offense, I like Dante Moncrief better than Washington, but you'd be foolish not to get some shares of both guys. They both have a chance to become the number 2.
All right, let's close the show off by talking about Kyler Murray, because I think there is a chance that he finishes as a top 3 fantasy quarterback. I think there's also a chance that he's just terrible. Which one do you think is more likely to happen?
I think it's more likely that he's going to be good. I think
so too. It's like Robert Griffin's rookie year, right? It's just he's going to get the points if he's on the field.
Well, and sometimes, I always talk about fantasy should be fun, and sometimes you just want to buy into some of these narratives. But this is one where there's been a few times where we've seen everything sort of lining up in the right direction. And the Cardinals might not be as good of a team as the Chiefs were last year, as the Broncos were in that big Peyton Manning season. But in those 2 years, we saw everything sort of lining up and looking like it was going to be a big fantasy season for those quarterbacks. And with the Peyton one, obviously he was already a great quarterback and they had a lot of weapons, and they were going to play a high volume offense. And then last year, I know another bold prediction I had before the season, I didn't say that Patrick Mahomes is going to be the number 1 quarterback, but I said he had the potential to be top 5 based on his entire situation and his talent.
I remember you saying that, and Tags and I were like, yeah, I could see that happening, but you were the one that went out on a limb and said that, and you nailed it.
Even though it was essentially his rookie season after he didn't really play his first year, he had that kind of upside. And now we're looking at Murray, where it is his rookie season, but his rushing ability alone makes him a potential quarterback 1, right? We've seen all these other guys come in. Lamar Jackson, you want to go recent guys, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen last year. Both those guys were fantasy starters in the second half of the season, and they're not that great at passing the football, right? Like they're not as good as the elite passers in the league. I think Murray's a better passer than both those guys already. You have the Cliff Kingsbury offense, which is going to ratchet up the volume in Arizona. The offensive line is a little bit better, at least from what they had last year when Rosen just got destroyed behind it. The receiving core, they brought in a few pieces in the draft, some guys who could make an impact, and I think Christian Kirk could take a step forward this year. Fitzgerald's kind of like the tight end almost now, right? He's playing in the slot. He's a really reliable guy, but I don't think his days of, being a big fantasy producer or a high-end wide receiver are gone, but still a very good player to have for a young quarterback that he can learn from, that, dump off to. And then you have David Johnson, who not only is going to make the running game good, but he's also an excellent receiver as well, one of the best receiving backs. So you have all these elements sort of surrounding Murray, not just his talent, but everything around him. This could be a situation. I think it's a bold call, but I would liken it to what I said about Mahomes last year. I like what you're saying there, that he could be a top 3. The only thing I would say that I'm a little... that sort of tempers my expectations a little bit, or makes me worried I'm not going to have him very many places, is his rising ADP. Because at this point, I talked before about not necessarily wanting to spend a pick in the first 7 rounds to get Murray. He's already, I believe he's going in like the 8th round now. It depends, because the quarterbacks sort of go all over the place. It depends on the draft you're in. But the last ADP I saw, I'm pretty sure he was going like the 8th or 9th round. And that's getting up to the point where, yeah, I don't know that I want. He was like, believe he was the quarterback 8. He was the 8th quarterback off the board in that ADP. So the only part of that worries me is that, he's a player that in the preseason, the excitement's only going to grow, right? You're going to see him out in the field. He's going to make some wild plays and everyone's going to get excited even more. So I think his ADP is going to go even higher. And that would be my only concern, because I talked about it's no knock on him. And he does have a really, really high upside, but there's so many quarterbacks that you can get later that can fill the gap for you there, that I don't know that I'd want to spend that early of a pick. But as far as his ceiling goes, it could be the quarterback 1, really. Like, that's what we're talking about. I don't think we're being insane by saying that.
Michael Vick was the only quarterback who ever eclipsed 1,000 rushing yards in a season. If Kyler Murray plays 16 games, I'm going to go out and say he's doing it this year. I think he's the best rushing quarterback we've ever seen coming into the NFL. He's not as instinctual as Michael Vick, but I'll tell you what, he is extremely fast and agile.
I can't disagree. And remember the 1 year with Vic in Philly when no one really saw it coming, right? He had the talent. That was another situation. Everything was there, but people had their doubts. And then boom, the match is struck and the fire's there and away you go. I think we could be looking at that with Murray this year as well.
All right, Justin, that's all for today's show. Really appreciate you coming on.
Thanks for having me. And I will say before you let me go here, going back to our Dynasty League, I know you and Tags keep talking about how good your rosters are. Don't sleep on me. I made some good trades this offseason. I think I got a chance to knock you 2 off.
Your team's good, man. Your team's really good. All right, guys, follow Justin if you don't already on Twitter at his name, Justin Boone. I'm at Bobby Fantasy Pro, and thanks to the sponsor of today's show, PristineAuction.com. That's Pristine. And when you register for them, make sure to put in the registration code. That's a field at the top of the registration page. You put in Fantasy Pros, all one word. That'll get you a $5 credit, and it tells them, hey, our podcast is sending people to your website. That way we can keep doing these giveaways like the Travis Kelce helmet we have going on right now at FantasyPros.com/contest. For Justin Boone, I'm Bobby Sylvester. Thanks for listening,